very much. And I'd like to introduce you to Jon Rouse. Jon Rouse is the Chief Officer for the Greater Manchester Health and Social Care Partnership, and it gives me a great pleasure to introduce you to him. So thank you very much.
Well, the really good news for me this evening is that I've already been handed a letter that told me that you found my talk very informative and useful and to include the Q&A session. I've just checked and it's indelible, so but I will try and live up to that billing. If you've been around in 1908 on Piccadilly in Manchester, you would have seen a pretty extraordinary sight. You would have seen, coming out of the infirmary, which was on Piccadilly at that time, the very first hospital in Manchester, 300 patients coming out of the hospital on stretchers, some of them walking wounded, all being carried onto or clambering onto horse bus, carts, a motley collection, as the historian Stuart Wilson described it, of different modes of transport. To carry all these patients all the way up to the Oxford Road into the newly built infirmary, which was next to the Eye Hospital, where the Eye Hospital is today. And this was the most extraordinary sight. And of all these patients, one, and it says the history book says only one, was unfit to travel and actually stayed in the old infirmary. I don't know how long he or she lasted, but given the old infirmary, it took another 2 years to be knocked out. This may be one of the very first examples of personalised, it's quite an interesting story, is that the history books record it. So this wasn't a medical history, it wasn't a history of sort of clinical antecedents for NHS. This was a social history book. I want to look in the index of this social history book on Manchester. There are about 15 references to health. When I look them up, I find that 14 out of the 15 are about hospitals. And one is about public health, because what I find in history books is the chief medical officer turns up at some point for a cameo role, usually due to a cholera epidemic or something of that ilk. And yet, you will be hard pressed to find reference in history books, in social history books, about the growth and development of family doctrine and what became general practice. Somehow, general practice has been allowed to go under the radar of this overall sweep of history within our country. And it makes me wonder whether that in part explains what I think you would best describe as a benign but sorrowful neglect of general practice over the last 10, 15 years, that has seen the amount that we spend on general practice decline as a proportion of the overall budget of the NHS, to our great detriment, given the levels of rising demand and the changing demography that you are dealing with. So we end up now in a position in 2017 where general practice is struggling to cope with that demand, and we have too many GPs who are either leaving practice, leaving the profession, or looking for a way out, or are struggling to stay motivated, or actually still love their job but are just exhausted. And exhausted with the treadmill, and wondering where some of their dreams and ambitions went in terms of that proactive care, that continuity of care that they aspired to when they made the choice to go to general practice in the first place. And this isn't just about the people who are practicing now, it's about the next generation. One of the things that really bothers me is that Manchester Medical School has the lowest proportion in the country of its undergraduate students going on to become GPs. The lowest proportion in the country. Doesn't do very well on psychiatry either, while we're on the subject. And that's got to change. That's got to change. But that isn't just about Manchester Medical School. This is a problem across many of our medical schools across the country. And it symbolises something. What messages are those students receiving during their education? What opportunities are they getting? What opportunities are they not getting? There's a lots of things that are underpinning the choices and decisions that they're making about where they can best fulfil their own ambitions and their career. And the sad thing is that many of them who are making different choices are of course missing out on the ability to serve at the heart communities, to actually really get to know patients, to actually own their journey, go on their journey with them, and to provide that proactive, continuous care that is at the heart of general practice. So our starting point within Greater Manchester under devolution is this, and it's very simple really. We believe that general practice is the key pivot point within the proper and sustainable functioning of our whole health and care system. That's what our primary care reform strategy says. That's what Taking Charge Together says on our sort of parent document. And therefore, if general practice fails, then we cannot succeed as a whole. We can't succeed by just getting better and cleverer at doing a particular form of elective surgery or investing in better technology, proton beam therapy centres or whatever it might be, important though they are, because they're not the pivot point. The pivot point is the relationship between the GP and their patient. And how well we do that, how we equip, strengthen general practice over the next 5 to 10 years within Greater Manchester, even if that's counter-trend in terms of what might be going on in the rest of the country, will be the key determinant in our success or failure of our overall programme under devolution. That is what we believe, and that is what we've stated very clearly within our plans. But of course that isn't going to happen by magic or osmosis, and devolution isn't some form of magic dust that you just sprinkle over a conurbation and things change. We've actually got a huge turnaround process that we need to embark upon if we're going to get general practice to the state consistently across Greater Manchester where it can play that role. And really what my presentation does today is very simply tell you, or give you some ideas about how we might go about that and what that might look like. And the timing of this speech is just fantastic. I mean, it was a pure coincidence. But on Friday, we take to our Strategic Partnership Board our proposals for the implementation of the primary care strategy as it impacts upon general practice. And so I'm sharing with you today some of the detail of those proposals, but you can read them for yourself because they're now on our website as of yesterday afternoon. So the papers are now in the public domain. We'll be putting some publicity out about them, so actually you'll hear some of this speech probably in various news releases and blogs over the next week, so I apologise in advance for the repetition. You heard it here first. But what we're going to set out tonight is at the heart of those proposals, and I'll tell you at the end of the talk about what will then happen in terms of the implementation next steps. So, if we are going to transform primary care, if we're going to transform general practice and get it where we need it to be, then of course we've got to create the right relationships around it. And you'll have heard many things about local care organisations and the integrated commissioning structures we're trying to create within localities. But often that gets presented in a structural sense. So we talk about, where is it going to be an alliance, or is it going to be an MCP, or is it going to be a PACS model? And the danger of that is that in reality, form needs to follow function. And what really matters is what is it that the LCOs are going to do differently in the way that they organise services that is going to support this pivotal relationship between primary care and patient, general practice and patient. And the most important thing that local care organisations will have a better chance of doing than the current fragmental structures which we have at the present time is that they've got a better chance of joining up services that you need as GPs to support you in terms of your practice. And in saying that, I'm not just talking about clinical services, important though they are, in terms of access to clinical pharmacists and phlebotomy services, and et cetera. I'm as interested, if not more interested, in the social access that you have. And this is particularly important in the most deprived areas, as we've seen through our Doctors in Deprivation group and some of the work that's been going on with organisations like the Shared Health Foundation. So what access do you have to social work services? What ease of access do you have to advice from housing officers? Could we actually take the Fit for Work service, which is currently in a call centre in Sheffield, and actually devolve it down to individual neighbourhoods to actually provide occupational health support to the people who are walking into your door who don't have a job? And actually, that is a part of the core of why they're at your door in the first place. And so what we're interested in is developing a sort of biosocial, clinical social model of support around GPs, around primary care, with you as a pivot point, that gives you these different sources of access. But of course, that isn't sufficient because you have to change as well. And it's not that we're going to be prescriptive about the change. We're not going to say there is one model and ye shall follow it. That isn't what we're going to do. But what we have done through the primary care strategy is, and we called it deliberately primary care contribution because it's part of this broader piece, is that you have to organise yourselves within your neighbourhoods, within your neighbourhood clusters, in a way that allows us to organise those services more seamlessly around you and to allow for that referral. Because there are services that we can provide, but we're not going to be able to do that at every single individual practice. That just isn't realistic. There'll be some we can, but there'll be many that we can't. And once you bring that up to a 30 to 50,000 population level, then lots more things become possible in terms of the way that we organise those services. And because our ambition is that within each of those 30 to 50,000 clusters, we will have a dedicated neighbourhood hub, we can also begin to co-locate some of those services as well, so that they begin to work together more seamlessly between each other, as well as in terms of our access and support for primary care. So I know that many of you are already organised into clusters, and they're organised in different ways, in different geographies. But the thing that I just want to stress is that might be a better way of organising and delivering the primary care, and we'll come on to that in a few minutes when we talk about things like access. But actually, it's important for all the other services as well, in terms of how you interface with those services, if we're going to be able to create the type of model of care that we're looking for. It was brilliant. I know they're in the room, so this is apposite for me to say, but I had a fantastic visit to Glodick. Have I pronounced that correctly? Yeah. Oh, I always get the wrong. I always get which is the silent letter. To Glodick a couple of weeks ago. And what was fantastic about that visit is it exemplified everything that we believe and we're trying to do in terms of asset-based community development linked to primary care. So seeing the primary care centre, the medical centre and the community centre being developed as a healthy living hub, all working together, single strategy, neighbourhood cluster, 5 practices, got that right? 9 practices, sorry. It was all working together and making the most of these assets and the social fabric that third sector organisations have created, some of them faith-based, in that community. Tremendously exciting and exemplified exactly what we're trying to strive for. So I've been talking for 10 minutes, and I'm talking about money, so we ought to do that. So I think most people know that we have a transformation fund to drive the devolution programme. We owe Howard Bernstein in particular, the Chief Executive of Manchester City Council, a huge debt of thanks because he negotiated that transformation fund for us at the time of the spending review. And of course, what's happened since is that most of the other STPs, the door has closed because the transformation funding has been largely hoovered up into dealing with sustainability, but not much transformation, particularly around deficits. But actually, Howard negotiated that deal with us, with Simon Stevens in particular, blessed by George Osborne, at just the right moment, which means that we now have this £450 million pot over a 4-year period that takes a whole number of national programme lines and aggregates them and gives us the choice about how we spend them in support of the transformation journey that we're on. And so I just want to tell you, in spirit of complete openness, which programme lines got placed in our transformation fund a year and a half ago and which didn't. And I'm happy to make this available to you afterwards. It's not secret in any way, which is why I put it up there. So it's just so you know that there's a load of stuff that we are still relying on national funding for. But there's also stuff which is now our responsibility, which is on the left-hand side. And of course we will continue to badger and lobby for as much of that resource as we can, and we'll align it with the rest of our work. What I'm largely talking about today, not exclusively, what I'm largely talking about is the left-hand side. Because what we're doing on Friday is basically making an announcement about how we're going to spend some of that money on general practice. And that's therefore what I'm going to refer to in a few minutes. But before I talk about how much and what we're going to spend it on, I think it's worth just first of all establishing some principles in terms of what we're committed to and have been since we published the primary care contribution document in October. So I've already done the first slide. The second line is important. Before I did this job, so I arrived in July, I spent the last 3.5 years at the Department of Health as one of the Director Generals, and I had responsibility for out-of-hospital care. And one of the things that I'm very proud of, and of course I wasn't the only architect of it by any means, people like Jon Rouse take a much greater part of the credit at NHS England, but it was the creation of the General Practice 5-year forward view. And the reason I'm proud of that document is because we somehow managed to largely depoliticise it. In other words, it's a pretty honest appraisal of the current state of general practice. And I think what it says about what needs to be done at the national level is pretty much what we can sign up to in Greater Manchester. I don't think there's a big divide between what we believe and what the GP 5-year forward view says. There are some subtle differences, and I'll explain those as we go through some of the other bits of the presentation. We have a different view, for example, about the interpretation of what is called in the GP 5-year forward view 7-day access. So we believe in enhanced access, but we would like to do something a bit different in Greater Manchester, which we'll come back to. So GP 5-year forward view, make sure we're consistent with it. Aligning to the locality plans. So again, this isn't some top-down exercise. Each of the localities has got a locality plan. What we do around primary care needs to be an extrapolation and interpretation of that plan. Next was pretty critical. So we have an absolute commitment to increase investment in general practice. And this is critical because otherwise it would just be rhetoric. It would just be hollow words. You can't have a situation where general practice has been disinvested in over a whole number of years and then say we're going to do transformation if you don't back it up with some resource. Now, there's unquestionably some resource will come via the locality plans and the allocations we've made to localities. But that's largely the localities' gift, and I can't say hand on heart how much will be committed by different localities direct to primary care, or indeed the community services from which you will benefit in terms of support and referral. What I can talk about tonight is the money that we will be investing directly via CCGs, but us determining how much resource each locality gets, and all of it going to a general practice or broader primary care to support general practice. The rest of this slide begins to give you some of the parts of the wider programme. So we're absolutely committed to setting up a GM bespoke and GM-wide resilience programme. And I'll say a little bit about what that looks like in a few minutes. We're absolutely committed to getting to a better model of integrated out-of-hospital urgent care provision. And as part of that, we need to turn up some stones basically around out-of-hours GP provision in every locality. And do that with you, but have a really good look at it and say, is this what we need? How does this relate to enhanced routine access? How does it relate to the rest of the integrated urgent care offer? Are we spending our money as wisely as we could be? And then putting those rocks back together, maybe in a slightly different formation, if that's what makes sense for the locality. We're committed to increased investment in the primary care estate. We've been able to do some stuff this year using some capital resource. We have a pipeline. On top of that, we're going to look if we can access some new sources of finance for those neighbourhood hubs, and there aren't that many of them, thankfully, that do need capital investment. In some areas, because of the legacy of the LIVE programme, whatever its flaws, we actually have a pretty good infrastructure in terms of estate for those neighbourhood hubs. But there are some geographies where that isn't true, and those will be prioritised in terms of capital investment over the coming years to support the model of care that we're trying to create. So, the money. So our commitment to you is an investment over the next 3 to 4 years of up to, and it'll be in the region of, which is why I'm just being a bit careful with the amount, 41.2 million. That will fund the programme that I'm describing today, and it will have several component parts. A deal around enhanced access, building on the Prime Minister's Challenge Fund, but which makes sense in terms of the neighbourhood model, neighbourhood clusters, not by any means having any sort of expectation that every practice is going to be able suddenly to provide 8 to 8, 7 days a week or anything like that. But within your neighbourhoods, looking at routine access, and urgent care together within your clusters, what is it that we can provide and what do we need to invest to get up to the national standard of first a 30-minute per 1,000 population improvement and then a 45-minute per 1,000 population improvement. But what's different about our approach to enhanced access, other than the fact that we focus on the neighbourhood model and practices working with customers, is the fact that in terms of particularly the weekend provision, we want to encourage individual localities, individual neighbourhood clusters to think about how that extra access is best targeted on your population's needs. So that might be, if we're in the city centre of Manchester, doing something specific about the homeless population. If you're in Fallowfield, it might be something specific about the student population. It might be something for carers. It might be extra service into care home. It could be a whole number of different ways of using that money to actually provide enhanced access, which is really about more proactive care for those who need it most. The other thing that we want to do, particularly thinking about the neighbourhoods and maybe even at a level above the neighbourhoods in terms of integrated urgent care hubs, is what is it that we could lift out of individual practices that is routine and repetitive, that actually will be better done at a different level of geography, on a more sort of economies of scale basis, that would again free up time potentially for individual practices to do more proactive care. So as part of the working through of this model, that's something that we need to look at as well. And again, I think there's a role for the local care organisations within that type of analysis. Other commitments that we're going to make, real investment in training and development for receptionists, clerical staff, to try to get best practice rolled out across Greater Manchester in terms of different ways of managing demand and trying to take some burden off GPs and wider practice. We're going to invest in expanding the wider practice workforce with an additional 100 clinical pharmacists that again will be aligned with the individual neighbourhood clusters. And then we're also hopefully on the verge of negotiating an integrated digital fund, part of which will be around investment in technology to support, again, better ways of working, more efficient ways of working. So that's a sort of brief description. The papers on the website describes that in more detail. This is the programme in totality, which actually I probably could have put on the last slide, but never mind. So the four key components are delivering improved access, GM resilience programme, workforce, primary care, estates. The basic model for improved access is the same as the national model, which is a working rate of £6 per extra hour in terms of that provision. So that's the rate that we're investing. And you can see the reference there to the hub-based model that we're trying to create, and the other key components of it set out there. So in terms of the 24/7 review, which is linked really to the enhancement of access, this is what we're trying to generate or trying to have a look at. Is there significant duplication in the system that we could eliminate or remove and would free up efficiencies? Can we get to greater clarity for patients in terms of access out of hours? It's incredibly confusing at the moment. That's one of the reasons why people pitch up at A&E. Can we move away from the problem we've got with some of our out-of-hours provision, with services being delivered in silos that are properly joined up with other services, so that we can do genuine deflection? So the whole system knows what the opportunities are at any given time, and we can be proactive in directing people to the right services at the right time, and also ideally that we can flex that provision at different times as well to reflect different pressures in the system, which is why therefore we're doing the baseline review of all urgent primary care provision. We're going to have an independent diagnostic against what we believe good practice looks like, not just in Greater Manchester, but actually the rest of the country. And then we're going to identify and recommend opportunities to commission to deliver services differently. Now, one big opportunity we've got is we're not doing this in isolation, we're doing it as part of a broader urgent care reform package, which will come forward in March. And as part of that, on the 1st of April, GM will take responsibility for commissioning NWAS services, ambulance and 111. So we will be performance managing that contract. We can develop with them different ways of delivering their services to better align with our evolving model of urgent care. So, in terms of the resilience programme, these are the 4 components of it. It will be peer-based, so there will be a hub that will be sort of properly staffed, but it will rely heavily on a relationship with the GMLMC and with the individual LMCs. We're talking to the BMA about them having a potential input to this programme, and we will be looking at 4 main sub-programmes in terms of the hub's work. So there's one generally about supporting improved workforce and workload. So one of the things we're doing at the moment, working with Salford and PA Consulting, is developing the workforce planning tool for general practice that will enable you to do all sorts of clever things in terms of modelling changes you might like to make or think about making, and it will tell you what the impact is in terms of how you would then be able to organise your time and what it might free up or not free up, as the case may be. It's quite sophisticated, actually. So we're going to test it in Salford, and then if it works, we'll roll it out more generally across Greater Manchester. Obviously, support around GP and nurse recruitment and other professional skills and so on. Standards and quality is the second part. We're about to hear from Alison. Support before, during and after visits, sharing and celebrating best practice, and coordination of performance support where that's required. The third area, which we call shock impact, is short notice crisis management for practices. And this will be the supporting the hub that we're creating, working closely with the regulatory team, which also sits under me, maintaining distance because we know in conflicts of interest, but where regulatory issues arise or a practice runs into financial problems or whatever it might be, there's an ability to say to the support hub, can you help? Can you organise rapidly, very rapidly around this practice, stabilise the situation, which may involve a process of closure, but it may involve some sort of remediation process, but in very rapid time. And then finally, a lot of work on analytics and diagnostics. So we want to do a lot more work around data. We're developing a relationship with NHS England because they're going to have a new primary care data stream coming through what they call their Cube, which is a Microsoft product. What that will allow us to do over time is to combine that data with all sorts of other data sets to try to get to more of an understanding about how a local system is working within its totality. But we also want to do more bottom-up and develop the work that, for example, Bolton do very, very well around using practice-level indicators and then creating a benchmarking community that is a learning community and is about actually working out how are you doing that better than I am, can we understand why that's happening, why am I worse at that? And they've really got to that level of openness, which I aspire to for the whole of Greater Manchester, but that only comes bottom up. It's very difficult to impose that type of trust top down. And they've been at it, Carol, 5 years, 7 years? 7 years. 7 years, yeah. So, but very, very important to create that learning community amongst practices. So this is how it will be structured in terms of the resilience programme, that mix of reactive and proactive support, a single point of access to the support and development hub, but then a GP improvement team will be across Greater Manchester, peer-based, with support from the local LMCs and probably some BMA support as well, I think. So this is what it all adds up to. This is a sort of summary slide, really. In terms of next steps, particularly around the money, we're going to negotiate an investment agreement around with each CCG, which will also tie them to obviously release that money to the GPs, the practices themselves. The other one thing I would say about this is that we will make some expectations of the CCGs in return for this investment Obviously, some of that's about enhanced access and review of 24/7 out of hours care, but it's also about some of the things we need to get right within Greater Manchester. So, for example, we are absolutely committed to rolling out the Care Home Barnard programme within Greater Manchester, so there's effective primary care support to every care home in Greater Manchester. We won't be prescriptive about the model, but we want to make sure it's being done. And so we will expect, not through this money actually particularly, but through the money we've allocated through the locality plans, that provision is put in place as part of the out-of-hospital care model. So that's it in a nutshell. I hope that was helpful. That's where we've got to. It's not complete. There's a lot more work to be done. But I hope it gives you a sort of bang up-to-date view of where we've got to. And we'll see what reaction we get on Friday. And then we'll get on the roll.
Thank you very much.
Can we answer the question?
Yeah.
The few questions now.
Are we doing questions now? We're going to wait
Shall we do the question? You
Okay.
need to leave at 8:30.
Yeah, that's
So I
fine.
think
I just don't want to cut into your time. So.
So, basically, my name is Dr. Gyani, GP from Auditor. Just regarding a lot of things that you said, so just apologize my ignorance if I don't know about it. Federated models, a lot of areas they got their own federations. So our main concern is that, like, we got like GMS basic man contract. So these federations are coming, and whatever, like most of them become like limited companies. And our main concern was, if they become limited companies, they're taking over like man-based contracts from us. For example, out of hours. In our area, what they've done is they got primary charges, and we tried to be involved in that, but they didn't give any share to anybody else. Okay, we'll take it. We'll do the out of hours. They already go to doc services going on. Oh, they do dinner as well. Walking centers there as well. So whatever we got, okay, so we said, can we be part of it? Yeah, okay, we talk to you, but never comes. Whole year long, and they take over, and they use it. So our concern is, when these people come, they will take the basic, like the original contract for us.
So I can give you partial assurance. So the partial assurance I can give you is that nobody in Greater Manchester, as a result of devolution, is going to be forced to give up their core contract, the GMS contract. We're not going to do that. Some people may choose to, in terms of wanting to move fully into an LCO or into a different type of relationship, an MCP, whatever it might be. That's fine, and we will facilitate that. But we will not force any practice. It's not our intention to force any practice to give up their GMS contract if they don't want to. So I just want to make that clear. And in terms of the enhanced access money, the money for, we will want you to work through the neighbourhood clusters, but you don't have to give up your GMS contract to be part of those arrangements. Out of hours is a bit different, because the CCG obviously has much more say about how we organise out of house services and how that fits with integrated urgent care. But how they procure that has nothing to do with whether or not you've got a GMS contract or not. It's about how they want to organise those services and how they want to procure them.
Any other questions?
The cluster model. You could deliver a cluster model by putting out of hours delivering on a cluster basis. And that's not general practice delivering on a cluster basis. So what's the reassurance that we're going to get general practice at a cluster basis and not out of hours at a cluster basis?
That's a really good question. And so our starting point is that we would like to see GP led out of hours. And we think the neighbourhood is the right model. The difference with me is that I genuinely don't want to be prescriptive from the GM level. So if a CCG has a very different view, that's quite problematic because I don't really want to dictate terms, and it's meant to be sort of practice-led in terms of it's meant to be commissioner-led in terms of the process that we're kind of so we can advocate a model, but I'm not keen on prescribing an exact model of out of hours from the centre at GM. We can set some standards, but I worry about being over authoritarian.